Do you remember when mornings began with the faint crackle of a percolator on the stove and sunlight eased through thin cotton curtains like a quiet promise? Maybe you can almost smell it now. That rich, warm aroma of fresh coffee filling the kitchen before anyone else was awake. Back then, the world seemed softer, gentler, slower. You might remember the creak of the screen door, the chill of a linoleum floor under your feet, or the low hum of the refrigerator that always seemed just a little too loud in the early hours. And maybe, just maybe, if you close your eyes, you can picture a kitchen just like this one. A round wooden table polished every Saturday, a calendar from the local hardware store pinned beside the phone, a bread box, a jar of buttons, a radio humming in the background with the morning news. Steady, calm, familiar. This was home, and you were there. Maybe you were a child rubbing the sleep from your eyes, or a teenager rushing through cereal before catching the school bus, or a young parent standing at that very counter making breakfast while the house slowly came alive. This wasn't just a different time. It was a different feeling, a feeling of steadiness, of knowing your neighbors, of kids playing outside until the streetlights flickered on, of families gathering around the same table every night without fail. Today, we're going back there, back to an America built on front porch hellos, handwritten letters, and the easy laughter of families who didn't have much, but always had enough. We're stepping into your memories, your childhood, your neighborhood, your home. Because this isn't just a story about life in the 1950s. It's the story of how you grew up. So take a breath. Let the years melt away. And remember the warmth of those Sunday mornings. Remember the clatter of breakfast plates. Remember the comfort of a time when life felt steady, when moments were simple but never small. Let's take a walk back to the America you grew up in. Chapter 1. The baby boom begins. The world you were born into. Maybe you remember this time, or maybe your parents told you stories about it. The years just after World War II, when America exhaled for the first time in a long, long while. The world you were born into was full of a kind of hope that's hard to explain today, but you might still feel it when you think back. There was a sense, a gentle, rising feeling that life could begin again. Soldiers stepped off trains with duffel bags slung over their shoulders, not running anymore, not hiding, just walking back toward the families waiting with open arms and tearful smiles. Maybe your father was one of them. Maybe he came home with a little extra quiet in his eyes, but also with a determination to build something better, something safe, something steady. The GI Bill opened the door for millions of young men to buy homes, attend college, start careers, and with that came the Great Rebuilding. And then the babies came. Millions and millions of them. Maybe you were one of those babies, born into a world that felt brand new. Picture it now. A hospital nursery lined with rows of bassinets, tiny feet kicking under pastel blankets, soft blues, soft pinks, the gentle squeak of rocking chairs, the bright smell of disinfectant mixed with the faint sweetness of baby powder. Nurses in white uniforms moved quietly between the rows, touching each newborn with a kind of practiced tenderness. And new parents, wide-eyed, tired, amazed, stood at the windows smiling through the glass, pointing out the baby that changed everything. Maybe you were that baby, or maybe you've seen the old photos, crinkled edges, faded colors, your mother's hair curled just so, your father standing beside her, proud, young, full of plans. Back then, the country felt like it was resetting itself. People were ready to build, to dream, to grow. Life was slower then, but full of hope. And you were part of that hope, a new life in a country overflowing with second chances. The feel of the 1950s American dream. Maybe you remember those early neighborhoods, the kind where every house looked new, every yard looked freshly planted, and every street felt like the beginning of something. Across the country, suburbs were rising from empty fields. Acres of land suddenly dotted with wooden frames, new foundations, and sidewalks that seemed to appear overnight. The smell of new lumber hung in the air, sharp, warm, almost sweet. Fresh paint dried on brand new front doors. Hammering echoed all day long, a steady rhythm of a nation rebuilding itself. You might remember walking past a construction site as a child, running your fingers through sawdust on the ground, or watching workers lift up an entire wall at once, your eyes wide with wonder. Maybe your family moved into one of those homes, a small house with big dreams, a place with a tidy kitchen, a living room perfect for Sunday nights around the television, and bedrooms just right for kids who were growing faster than anyone expected. Maybe your yard was nothing but dirt at first, a blank slate waiting for grass to grow, waiting for bicycles to carve paths through it, waiting for the sound of kids laughing as they chased each other under the summer sun. Inside, everything felt new. New stove, new refrigerator, new furniture that still smelled like the store. And with every new thing came a shared belief. This is our chance. Americans were stepping into a dream that wasn't about wealth, but about stability, about safety, about having a place to call home. Maybe you remember your parents talking about this, about how the world was changing, how the future felt open and bright. Maybe you remember lying in bed as a child, listening to their soft voices drifting through the walls, talking about bills, about plans, about making things better for the family. Life wasn't perfect, but it felt possible. It felt hopeful. Life was slower then, but full of hope. That refrain echoed through every dinner table, every front porch conversation, every quiet moment in those early homes. And whether you were a baby, a child, or just someone whose story began in those years, you were a part of a generation that grew up in a world being rebuilt with love, effort, and endless optimism. Chapter 2, Home Sweet Home, the house. Layout. Maybe you remember stepping into a 1950s home and sensing something that's hard to describe today, a kind of warmth, a simplicity, a steadiness that wrapped around you like a soft blanket. Every house had its own personality, yet somehow they all shared the same soul. Let's walk through it together, room by room, as if you're stepping back into the house you grew up in. Right through the front door, there it was, the living room. Maybe your family called it the front room. Maybe it was the place where guests sat, or where your mother told you not to jump on the furniture even though you probably did anyway. The carpet might have been a thick shag or a floral pattern, or one of those solid colors that looked brand new for years. And against one wall sat the heart of the room, the black and white television. Do you remember the click of the dial? That loud, satisfying sound as you turned the channel knob? The screen taking a moment to brighten, then settling into that familiar glow. Maybe your father would adjust the rabbit ears, tilting them this way and that, sometimes wrapping foil around them because, for reasons nobody understood, that always seemed to help. On weeknights, maybe the whole family gathered there, feet tucked under blankets, a soft lamp glowing in the corner, the only light besides the TV. This was the room where America watched its stories unfold. Just a few steps away was the dinette area. You might remember the shiny chrome-edged table with matching vinyl chairs, red, turquoise, yellow, or mint green. When you sat down, the vinyl felt cool under your legs, the chrome edging smooth beneath your fingers. These tables squeaked when you leaned on them, sliding just a little on the linoleum floor. This was where cereal boxes stood tall in the mornings, where sandwiches were cut diagonally in the afternoons, and where homework spread out in the evening. Maybe you can still hear the clinking of silverware, the hum of the kitchen light, and your mother's voice calling you to sit down. And then there was the kitchen, the pastel kitchen, a hallmark of the 1950s, soft yellow, baby blue, warm pink, mint green. If you grew up in this era, you probably remember those colors instantly. The cabinets had rounded corners. The countertops sometimes sparkled with tiny flecks. The floors were checkerboard linoleum, black and white, or red and cream. Maybe your kitchen smelled like fresh coffee in the morning, the kind that perked in a metal pot on the counter, filling the whole house with a warm, comforting aroma. Or maybe it smelled like cinnamon rolls on Sunday, or pot roast on a chilly afternoon, or fried chicken that crackled on the stove before company came over. The kitchen wasn't just a room, it was the heartbeat of the home. Up the hallway were the bedrooms, small, simple, but full of memories. If you grew up in the 50s, your room might have had twin beds, neatly made with matching spreads. Maybe the blankets were thick and scratchy, or soft chenille with little patterns of flowers, stars, or stripes. You might remember wooden dressers, their drawers sticking just a little when you pulled them open. A small desk with a lamp that hummed softly. A window that let in the smell of fresh-cut grass in the summer and the sound of rain tapping gently in the spring. Maybe you shared your room with a sibling, talking late into the night, giggling when you should have been sleeping, telling secrets you still remember. Every wall, every texture, every sound was part of the fabric of life back then. It wasn't fancy, it wasn't modern, but it was home, a place where life was slower then, but full of hope. 2.2 Appliances and Mid-Century Modern Magic. Now, let's open a few cabinets, touch a few buttons, and listen closely to the everyday magic that filled a 1950s home. In the kitchen stood the refrigerator, big, solid, rounded at the corners, with a heavy door you had to pull firmly to open. And behind that door was a sound you might remember to this day, that soft, steady humming, almost like a lullaby for the whole house. Do you remember that buzzing refrigerator hum? The one you only noticed when the rest of the house was quiet. And when it shut off, suddenly everything seemed so still you could hear the ticking of a clock in the next room. Inside the refrigerator, the freezer was small, with metal ice trays that took real muscle to twist. Do you remember that little handle you had to lift to crack the ice free? The metal squeaking, the ice cubes popping loose. On the countertop sat the toaster, chrome shining like a mirror, edges rounded like everything else in the era. Bread went in, the lever clicked down, and a warm glow lit the inside. When it popped, loud enough to make you jump sometimes. Beside it might have sat the rotary phone, heavy, reliable, its dial clicking as your fingers circled around the numbers. You could hear the whirring sound as the dial returned, slow and patient, just like life itself. If you grew up in the 50s, you might remember stretching the phone cord across the room, twisting it around your fingers while talking to a friend, or overhearing your mother chatting with a neighbor, her voice soft but animated. And the radio. Oh, the radio. Maybe it sat on the counter or on a shelf in the living room, wooden, warm with glowing dials. You might remember the feel of the knobs, smooth, firm, turning with a soft resistance, and the soft static when the station wasn't quite aligned. Songs drifted through those speakers like magic. Voices of announcers felt deeper, calmer, more deliberate. And when a baseball game played, the whole house listened. These weren't just appliances. They were companions, part of daily rituals that shaped entire generations. Everything made a sound. Everything had weight. Everything had presence. It was a world where even the smallest objects carried memories that last a lifetime. Family roles. Now, let's step back and look at the people who filled these homes. The 1950s family had a rhythm, a pattern, a way of moving that feels almost like a storybook now. And maybe it was your story. You might remember your mother, the homemaker, the caretaker, the quiet strength of the entire household. She moved through the kitchen with practiced ease, folding laundry, helping with homework, kneading dough on the countertop, her hands always busy, but her eyes always watching over the family. Her days were long, even if the world didn't always see it that way. Maybe you remember her aprons, floral, pastel, or with little frills around the edges, the soft scent of flour on her hands, the way she hummed while cooking, the way she checked on you just one more time before bed. And then there was the father, the breadwinner. Maybe he wore a suit to work, carried a briefcase, kissed your mother goodbye in the morning, and returned home just in time for dinner. Or maybe he worked with his hands, building things, fixing things, coming home tired but smiling. His footsteps on the porch were a sound you could recognize from anywhere in the house. When he came through the door, you might remember the smell of the outdoors on his clothes, or the way he loosened his tie, or the soft sigh that meant he was finally home. Family roles then weren't perfect, and not always fair by today's standards, but for many people, there was a sense of structure, of stability, of knowing exactly where everyone fit. Maybe you remember your parents dancing in the living room when they thought no one was watching, or laughing at the dinner table over a joke one of the kids told, or sitting quietly together on the couch after a long day. These were the small moments that built the foundation of family life. Moments simple enough to forget, yet powerful enough to shape a lifetime. And as you think back, maybe you can feel it again. Life was slower then, but full of hope. And in those modest homes, with their humming refrigerators, their pastel kitchens, their soft lamplight and sturdy routines, a generation grew up surrounded by love, structure, and memories that still live inside them today. Chapter 3. Morning Routines. The smells and sounds of mornings. Maybe you can still remember how a morning felt in a 1950s home. Not just the actions, but the sensation of it. The quietness before the house woke up. The faint glow of sunrise slipping through the curtains. The familiar creaks of the floorboards as someone stirred. And then, little by little, the world of home came alive. Do you remember the smell of bacon frying in the kitchen? That rich, warm aroma drifting down the hallway? So comforting, so steady, a scent that could pull even the sleepiest child out of bed. And just beside it, the unmistakable sound of the coffee percolator, that bubbling rhythmic pulse, like the heartbeat of the entire morning. In those days, coffee didn't drip quietly into a paper filter. No, it perked, it gurgled. It built anticipation with every bubbling rise. You could stand beside the counter and hear the burble growing louder, the kitchen filling with the aroma of roasted beans long before the first sip. Maybe your father was the first one awake, pouring himself a steaming cup while scanning the morning headlines. You might remember the sound of the newspaper hitting the porch, that crisp, sudden thump that signaled the day had officially begun. Some dads grabbed the paper first thing, folding it into sections, clearing their throat as they read the latest news, occasionally muttering something under their breath before taking another drink of coffee. For the kids, mornings had their own rhythm. Maybe you ran into the kitchen barefoot, feeling the cool linoleum under your feet, heading straight for the cereal boxes, Cheerios, Wheaties, Rice Krispies, or those sugary ones you only got on special weekends. Do you remember the sound of cereal hitting the bowl? The crackle of Rice Krispies? The way the milk poured cold and smooth, sending little splashes onto the table? Every child had their favorite spoon, their favorite bowl. Some were metal, some plastic, some chipped, but they were part of the morning ritual. And then there was the radio, not the TV. That came later in the day. Mornings belonged to the kitchen radio. You might remember the soft hum of its tubes warming up, the slight static as the dial settled onto the right station, the familiar voices of morning announcers, steady, calm, friendly, like old companions helping you start the day. The news came on. Then the weather. Maybe a light song or two as the morning grew brighter. Some households listened to your hit parade. Others tuned into simple morning programs or even farm reports. Gentle, practical, unhurried. The combination of bacon crackling, coffee bubbling, the newspaper rustling, and the radio humming softly in the background. That was the soundtrack of an American morning. A soundtrack many people can still hear even after all these decades. Mornings were unhurried, comforting, predictable, not rushed by buzzing phones, endless notifications, or chaotic schedules. It was a time when the world felt steady, when home felt like the center of everything, and when a single morning could feel like the safest place in the world. Moms preparing the day. And in the middle of all this, quietly orchestrating the entire morning, was the mother. Maybe you remember yours moving through the kitchen with a kind of practiced grace. Her apron tied neatly around her waist, hands busy but gentle, voice soft but steady. She didn't rush, or perhaps she did, but made it look effortless. She tended the bacon, kept an eye on the eggs, checked lunch boxes, found missing shoes, calmed sleepy children, and still somehow managed to get everyone out the door on time. Do you remember those aprons? Some were floral, some were pastel, some had pockets with lace trim, some tied in the back with a simple bow. And the way they moved with her as she bent, turned, reached for pans, or wiped the counter with a cloth, that image, that soft swaying of an apron, is etched deeply in the memories of millions who grew up in that era. On the counter might have been the lunch boxes, metal ones with cartoon characters or simple patterned ones, each filled with sandwiches wrapped in wax paper. Moms packed lunches with a kind of care that felt like love wrapped inside a box. A peanut butter and jelly sandwich, an apple, maybe a cookie, and sometimes a little note tucked under the lid with a few short words. Be good. Have a great day. See you after school. Simple, but unforgettable. Nearby stood the ironing board. Its metal legs squeaked when it unfolded. Its cover was patterned, flowers or stripes, soft cotton stretched tight. And on top of it sat the iron, shiny, heavy, warming up slowly. Do you remember the sound it made when your mother pressed it onto a damp shirt? That sharp, satisfying hiss as steam rose into the air? The soft clicking of the temperature dial? The crisp smell of freshly ironed fabric? Some mothers ironed everything. Pants, dresses, handkerchiefs, even the sheets. You could walk through the hallway and smell that warm, clean scent, steam mingling with the aroma of breakfast still lingering in the air. Maybe you can picture her now, standing over the ironing board, concentrating but humming softly, a curl of steam lifting from the fabric, sunlight catching the edge of her hair. These weren't small moments. They were the structure of everyday life, the quiet rhythm that held the family together, and even if you didn't understand it at the time, even if you rushed past her with a bowl of cereal in hand, you might now realize she was shaping the day. She was preparing the world you walked into. She was building the foundation of your childhood, one morning at a time. Mornings in the 1950s weren't perfect. Life had its challenges, its pressures, its worries that adults often kept hidden from the children. But the morning routine, that sacred hour of warmth and light and noise and comfort, was one of the most vivid memories many people still carry. The smell of breakfast, the hum of the radio, the clatter of cereal bowls, the presence of a mother preparing the day with patience, love, and quiet strength. It was the hour when home felt most alive. And even now, after all these years, you can almost hear it again. That gentle buzz of the refrigerator, that bubbling coffee pot, that soft voice calling, "It's time to get up." A moment in time, preserved in memory forever. Chapter 4. School Days. Walking or biking to school. Do you remember those mornings when the air felt crisp enough to sting your cheeks and the sky still carried that faint silver blue tint of early day? Back then, getting to school wasn't a chore. It was a ritual, a daily adventure wrapped in the breath of autumn, the crunch of leaves, and the echo of children's footsteps skipping down neighborhood sidewalks. Maybe you walked. Maybe you pedaled your bike, the tassels on your handlebars fluttering behind you like tiny flags of freedom. Or maybe you and a group of friends met at a corner you all silently agreed was the spot, long before anyone used words like carpool or drop-off lane. Listen, can you hear it again? The distant creak of a screen door slamming shut as another kid races out of the house. A mother's voice calling after them, "Don't forget your lunchbox." The muffled thud of a metal lunchbox bumping against a leg as a child jogs to catch up with friends. Those lunchboxes, hard metal, painted with cowboys, rocket ships, Disney characters, baseball heroes, icons of an America bursting with optimism. They weren't just containers for a sandwich and an apple. They were tiny badges of identity. And as you walked, sometimes with the sun barely peeking over rooftops, there was always that particular smell in the air, a blend of morning dew on grass, chimney smoke just starting to rise, and the faint oil and metal scent of your bicycle chain. Some mornings were brisk enough that you could see your breath. Other days were warm and breezy, and the neighborhood was alive with the flutter of laundry on backyard clotheslines. But the best mornings, the ones where the whole world felt as if it were waking up with you, a dog barking in the distance, a mailman stepping out of his truck, a neighbor waving from behind a newspaper, the soft rumble of a school bus somewhere far off or close enough to make you walk a little faster. And as you neared the school, you could hear it. The rising noise of kids gathering in clusters, laughter bouncing across the playground, the metallic clatter of bicycles being parked and locked to a railing. It felt safe, predictable, comforting. A rhythm millions of children lived every weekday, a routine so universal that even today, decades later, your mind still travels back to those sidewalks, that chill in the air, that sense of belonging, because you weren't just going to school. You were going to your world, a world built on small friendships, simple rules, and the unspoken magic of being young in the 1950s, inside the classroom. The moment you stepped inside the school building, everything changed. The outside world, windy, lively, full of morning noise, dissolved into a familiar hush. Hallways echoed with the sound of hard leather shoes tapping on polished floors. The smell? Oh, did you remember it? A blend of chalk dust, freshly sharpened pencils, books slightly worn from years of small hands flipping through them, and that subtle wood and varnish scent of old classroom desks. Your classroom wasn't just a room. It was a tiny universe, rows of sturdy wooden desks, each with its own personality. Scratches carved in by students from long ago, initials etched into corners, tiny grooves worn smooth from restless fingers, the desktops lifted open like treasure chests. Inside, notebooks, rulers, crayons, paper with wide blue lines, and sometimes a few secret items you prayed the teacher wouldn't find, and then the chalkboard. Nothing today feels quite like a chalkboard felt back then. The soft screech of chalk writing in looping cursive, the powdery residue that clung to your fingertips if you were lucky enough to be chosen to write an answer, the long felt erasers that smelled faintly of dust and fabric, and somewhere in the room, usually behind the teacher's desk, sat the globe. Not digital, not touch screen, just a big glowing ball of worlds you dreamed of visiting someday. The teacher, always dressed neatly, often in skirts or suits, commanded quiet without needing to raise her voice. There was a calm authority in those classrooms, a feeling that you were part of something important, something orderly, something meant to prepare you for a bright future. Books were handed out one by one, attendance was taken. And then that familiar sentence, "Please take your seats. Let's begin." Can you feel the room again? The warmth of sunlight spilling across the floor, the hum of fluorescent lights overhead, a classmate whispering a last-minute secret before being shooshed, the flutter of children turning pages in unison. There was a simple dignity to the way school worked in the 1950s. Not perfect, not always easy, but steady, reliable, structured in a way that made you feel anchored even if you didn't realize it then. And at some point during the day, usually early, you'd experience something unforgettable, something anyone who lived through it remembers instantly: the smell of chalk. Notice what happens inside you when I say that, the smell of chalk. It isn't just a smell, it's a time machine, a door that opens to memories you haven't visited in years. Friendships in recess. If the classroom was the heart of the school, then recess was the soul. No matter how much math or spelling you had to push through, you always kept one eye on the clock. Because recess wasn't just a break. It was a world filled with energy, freedom, and the pure joy of childhood. Can you see it again? The moment the teacher said, "All right, class, line up for recess," the room transformed instantly. Chairs scraped, pencils clattered. Kids practically leaped from their seats. And when those doors opened, you stepped into a playground symphony, hopscotch drawn in chalk that faded a little more each day, jump ropes slapping the pavement in rapid rhythm, marbles clicking together on the ground as kids knelt over hand-drawn circles, and the unmistakable squeak of metal swings rocking back and forth. The swings, oh, those swings, cold chains warming under the morning sun, the rubber seat slightly bending as you climbed on. The first push, that moment your feet left the ground and your whole world tilted upward into the sky. Some kids tried to swing the highest. Some jumped off mid-air and hoped for a safe landing. Others just rocked gently, humming to themselves while watching clouds drift overhead. And then there was dodgeball, the game that could unite a playground or spark lifelong rivalries. Rubber balls slamming against pavement, kids dodging, ducking, sprinting, laughter filling the air. Recess made friendships feel easy, loose, natural. You didn't need matching interests or shared beliefs. You just needed a ball or a chalk square or a swing next to someone willing to talk. And sometimes the best friendships of your childhood were built in those moments, not in lessons, not in hallways, but in the simple, breathless fun of recess. Even now, you can probably picture someone from those days. A best friend, a playground partner, someone who felt like they were going to be in your life forever. That's the power of nostalgia. It doesn't just bring back memories, it brings back the people who filled them. And as the bell rang and everyone rushed back inside, something subtle always happened. Your heart slowed, your breathing steadied, your cheeks felt warm from the wind and play, and for the rest of the day, you carried that feeling with you, a small, glowing reminder of what it meant to be young. School wasn't just reading and writing, it was childhood, pure, unfiltered childhood. And even now, decades later, your mind still wanders back to those playgrounds, those hallways, and those wooden desks, because some places, once you've lived in them, never truly leave you. Chapter 5, Neighborhood Life, the Friendly Neighborhood Era. There was something magical about neighborhoods in the 1950s, not loud, not rushed, not fragmented by fences or distractions, just connected. Do you remember how the neighborhood looked back then? Long rows of tidy houses, each with its own porch, some screened, some open, all of them well-loved. Porches weren't decorations. They were living rooms facing the street, spaces where the world passed by, slowly enough for you to wave at it. Neighbors sat in rocking chairs on warm evenings, sipping lemonade or iced tea. Cars moved slowly, never rushing, because everyone knew the kids played outside, and the lawns, wide open, unfenced, green carpets that blended from one yard to the next without boundaries. If you had a ball or a kite or a game of tag, the whole street was your playground. Everyone knew everyone. There wasn't a neighbor whose name you didn't know, and there wasn't a neighbor who didn't know yours. The families next door weren't strangers. They were almost extensions of your own family. If your dad needed a wrench or a ladder, he didn't drive to a store. He'd call across the yard, "Bill, you got a 3/8 wrench handy?" And Bill would walk over with a smile, wiping his hands on a rag. Moms chatted over clotheslines, clothespins clipped between their fingers as colored shirts and white sheets fluttered in the sun. Children roamed from yard to yard without asking permission, because permission was already understood. Your neighborhood wasn't just where you lived, it was where you belonged. And then there was that little but unforgettable thing. Do you remember the sound of a screen door, that iconic wooden clatter as it snapped shut behind someone stepping outside? That one sound alone could take you right back to your childhood porch. And as evening fell, those porches would glow with warm lamplight. Neighbors strolled the sidewalks after dinner. People talked face to face. No phones, no distractions, just conversation, real, present, and kind. It wasn't nostalgia that made those days feel simpler. They were simpler and maybe more connected than we ever realized at the time. Kids playing outside until dark. If you grew up in the 1950s, the neighborhood wasn't just a cluster of houses. It was your kingdom. From the moment school ended until the moment the streetlights flickered on, the entire outdoors belonged to you. Can you feel that again? The sound of screen doors swinging open as kids burst outside, their feet hitting the sidewalk before the door even finished shutting. Your mother would call out, "Be home before dark." And that was it. No check-ins, no constant supervision, just freedom, the kind modern kids can hardly imagine. The sidewalks were your highways. Roller skates clacked and rattled over the pavement, metal wheels shining in the afternoon sun. Sometimes tightening the skate key was a whole ceremony of its own. Bicycles buzzed past, some with baseball cards clipped to the spokes, fluttering like tiny engines. You rode fast, hair whipping, wind rushing past your ears. And then evening came, with its soft golden light pouring over the street, turning every minute into something dreamlike. Fireflies emerged, twinkling like floating sparks in the dark. Kids cupped them in their hands and watched them blink like tiny lanterns before releasing them back into the night. Hide and seek in the dusk felt almost sacred. Up the driveway, behind a hedge, around the garage, the thrill of running barefoot across warm summer grass, the giggle you tried to stifle while hiding behind a tree. You didn't need toys. You didn't need screens. You had imagination, and the whole world was your stage. Stickball games in the street, marbles in the dirt, jump ropes snapping in rhythmic patterns, hopscotch boxes chalked across the sidewalk. There were no scheduled playdates, no appointments, no planned activities. Friendships formed naturally, over a game, a laugh, a shared adventure. Every kid knew every kid. And when someone's mom baked cookies, you knew, because the smell drifted out the kitchen window and every kid drifted right along with it. As the sky deepened into purple and blue, the streetlights buzzed awake, one by one, slowly, softly. And that was your signal, your cue that the day was ending. Some moms called your name from porches, some flashed the porch light, some simply stepped outside and looked down the street. And you knew it was time, but part of you always wished for just 5 more minutes of a world where childhood felt infinite. Because those evenings, the ones filled with fireflies, laughter, and warm summer air, those are the moments you carry with you forever. Safety and community. Watch. It's hard to describe this part of the 1950s to anyone who didn't live through it. But you know exactly what I mean when I say, back then you could leave your doors unlocked. It wasn't just a saying, it was the truth. The screen door might have been shut to keep out flies, but the main door was often left open, day and night. Not because families were careless, but because neighborhoods looked out for each other. There was a quiet, unspoken agreement among everyone who lived on your street. We take care of each other. People noticed if a car drove by that didn't belong. Neighbors checked in on elderly residents without being asked. Kids could run miles from home, and someone along the way always knew who they were. It wasn't a neighborhood watch program. It was simply community, real community. If your dad worked late, the man next door kept an eye out. If your mom needed something, someone was always there. Birthdays, cookouts, block parties, every event was shared. There were phone trees, there were casserole drop-offs, there were porch visits after long days. And when something went wrong, when someone got sick or lost a job or needed help, the neighborhood didn't just care, it showed up. This wasn't unusual. This was normal. And maybe the most powerful memory from that era is this. You felt safe, not just because of locks or rules or supervision, but because you were held up by a community woven together like a family. You belonged to your street, to your town, to your neighbors, and they belonged to you. It's a feeling that lives somewhere deep inside you, a quiet ache, a longing for a time when people didn't just live near each other, they lived with each other. Chapter 6. Food, Kitchens, and Family Dinner. The iconic 1950s kitchen. If there is one room that carries the heartbeat of a 1950s home, it's the kitchen. Do you remember walking into your family kitchen on a weekday afternoon? That soft glow of sunlight coming through the window? That pastel color palette? Mint greens, baby blues, soft pinks, buttery yellows, that made the whole space feel cheerful in a way modern kitchens never quite replicate. The appliances were like artwork, pastel refrigerators with rounded edges, chrome handles that felt cool to the touch, checkerboard linoleum floors that clicked under your shoes, vinyl chairs with metal legs that squeaked ever so slightly when you sat down. There was something about the 1950s kitchen that felt alive, a room with personality, a room with warmth. You probably remember the hum of the refrigerator, that steady, gentle sound that filled the background of every day, or the way the oven door opened with a soft, heavy pull, its warm air spilling out with the smell of something baking. Food looked different then. Colors were brighter, plates were fuller, recipes were simple, but made with love. Jell-o molds were practically a symbol of the era. Do you remember those beautifully shaped desserts, shimmering reds, greens, oranges, each one carefully chilled in the icebox, sometimes with fruit suspended inside like little gems? Then there were casseroles. Oh, the casseroles. Tuna casserole, green bean casserole, noodle bakes, creamed chicken. They were warm, filling, and absolutely everywhere. Almost every family had a favorite one that no one else could quite duplicate. And then something new arrived, something that changed weeknights forever: TV dinners. They came in shiny aluminum trays, each section filled with something different: mashed potatoes, corn, meatloaf, Salisbury steak. You'd peel back the foil, slide the tray into the oven, and wait as the house slowly filled with the smell of a whole meal cooked in one go. It wasn't just food, it was progress, convenience, a taste of the future. Maybe your family only bought them as a treat now and then. Maybe you had them every Thursday. Or maybe you still remember the excitement of trying your first one. But even with all the new inventions, the kitchen still felt rooted in tradition. The bread box on the counter, the cookie jar with a few missing because someone couldn't resist, the spice rack, the mixing bowls stacked neatly, the apron hanging by the pantry door. This was a room where life happened, where meals were made, where kids did homework at the table, where bills were sorted, where stories were told, where love was served daily. And when you close your eyes, you can still feel it. You can still smell it. That warm, delicious, comforting scent of a 1950s kitchen, the scent of a world that felt full, happy, and safe. Dinner as a ritual. Evenings in the 1950s had a rhythm, a gentle pattern that brought families together day after day. Dinner wasn't just a meal, it was a ritual, a moment of connection, of togetherness, of belonging. You probably remember the sound of it beginning, the clatter of silverware being set on the table, plates stacked with care, the soft thud of chairs being pulled out, the faint rattle of glasses filled with milk, water, or iced tea. But nothing signaled the start of evening more than this. The moment your father came home, you heard his car in the driveway before you saw him, the engine shutting off, the car door closing, his footsteps approaching the front door, and then the jingle of his keys, the swoosh of the door opening, his voice calling out, "I'm home!" It wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic, it was simply reassuring, a daily reminder that the family was whole again. Your mother, still wearing her apron, would greet him with a smile. Kids would peek around corners or run into the hallway, and your father would loosen his tie, slip off his jacket, and settle into the comfort of home. Dinner time had an unspoken schedule, maybe 5:30, maybe 6. Whatever the time, the routine was steady and sacred. Everyone gathered around the table, no one ate alone. No one rushed. No one scrolled through anything or stared at a screen. The TV was off. Phones didn't exist. The world outside slowed down just enough to give families this one precious moment. Your mother would place the dishes in the center. A steaming casserole, a plate of rolls, vegetables from a can or from the garden, a roast or meatloaf or chicken fried golden. There was a quiet moment before anyone took a bite, a pause, a breath, sometimes a blessing spoken softly. Maybe your home sounded like this too. The clinking of utensils, the gentle hum of conversation, your parents asking about school, your siblings interrupting, the occasional laughter that made the whole table shake. Food tasted better at that table, not because of the seasoning, not because of the recipes, but because of the company. Family dinner was where stories were shared, where lessons were passed down, where love was served without ever needing to be spoken. And every once in a while, your mother would bring out dessert, maybe a slice of pie, maybe pudding, maybe that shimmering jell-o again. You didn't need anything fancy. You didn't need anything extra. You just needed that table, that room, those people. Even now, when you look back across the decades, there are few moments more vivid, more tender, more deeply rooted in your heart than those evening dinners. You didn't know then how precious they were. You didn't know they would become memories you'd hold for a lifetime. But you know now, because even today, if you listen closely, you can still hear it all. The scrape of a chair, the voice of a parent, the smell of dinner rising from the stove. the warmth of a home where the world felt steady, a place where family gathered and the day finally felt complete. Chapter 7. Television, Radio, and Entertainment. Evenings around the TV, soft fade in, a dim living room, a single warm lamp, the hum of a television warming up, the glow flickers to life. Do you remember those evenings when the entire family gathered around a television no bigger than a suitcase? Yet it felt like a window to the entire world, before endless channels, before remotes, before screens followed us everywhere. There was the ritual of television. Dad adjusting the antenna, one hand raised, one eye squinting. Mom calling out, "Don't stand in front of the screen, you're blocking it." Kids scrambling to find the best spot on the rug closest to the glow. Back then, owning a television meant something. It meant you had a portal, a link to the future. In 1950, only about 9% of American households had a TV. Just 5 years later, it was nearly 2/3 of the country. By the end of the decade, television wasn't a luxury anymore. It was the heartbeat of the American living room. And every family had their show. For many, it began with "I Love Lucy." You could hear the opening theme from 2 houses away, that famous laugh track. Ricky shouting, "Looky!" Lucy's wild schemes that somehow reflected the world we lived in. Ordinary people dreaming big, stumbling big, loving big. And if you grew up then, you didn't just watch Lucy, you felt like you knew her. She was that neighbor who always meant well, but oh, the trouble she caused. Then there was Leave It to Beaver, a gentle reminder of simpler childhoods. A world where the biggest crisis was a broken window, a poor report card, or Beaver trying, just trying, to understand how the grown-up world worked. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't always realistic, but it felt warm, it felt safe, it felt like home. And for adventure, well, nothing got kids sitting still faster than the Lone Ranger. You remember the theme, you remember that mask, you remember shouting, "Hi-yo, Silver," as if you too were riding alongside him through the frontier. Television gave you heroes, clean, noble, unwavering heroes, the kind that helped shape the way a generation understood right and wrong. But then there were the nights when the entire nation sat still. The nights when America didn't just watch a show, America watched a moment. Those were Ed Sullivan nights, a stage, a curtain, a spotlight, and Ed's unmistakable voice. Ladies and gentlemen, families gathered shoulder to shoulder, breath held, eyes fixed. You saw jugglers, opera singers, comedians, and every once in a while, you saw history, Elvis, the Beatles, Marilyn, icons who stepped onto that stage and stepped permanently into the American memory. Television in the 1950s wasn't noise, it wasn't background, it wasn't something to scroll past. It was an event, a nightly pilgrimage, a way for families to pause the world for a moment and just be together. Radio memories, but before televisions lit up every room, before families organized their evenings around a glowing screen, there was another companion, one older, wiser, and somehow more intimate, the radio. You remember that sound, the soft click of the dial, the warm buzz of tubes waking up, that gentle static hum that drifted through the room like a familiar old friend clearing his throat. The radio didn't show you pictures, it asked you to imagine them, and sometimes that made everything feel even more vivid. Baseball on the radio. Now that was something magical. Announcers didn't just call the game, they painted it. You could hear the crack of the bat, the cheers from the stands, the rising excitement in the announcer's voice as a ball soared deep into center field. Even if you were washing dishes, folding laundry, or lying on your back on the living room floor, you were right there in the stadium. The radio made you feel like you belonged to something bigger, something national, something shared. And then there were the story dramas, the mysteries, the late-night adventures, the creak of a door, the whisper of a villain, the gasp of a heroine in peril, the narrator's voice dropping to a hush, pulling you closer, inviting you into a world that lived entirely inside your imagination. Children would sit in front of the radio with their chins in their hands, eyes wide, not daring to blink in case they missed a sound. Parents would sit quietly nearby, content to let the stories carry them away, even if only for 30 minutes. And the glow. Do you remember the glow? That soft amber circle shining through the mesh of the radio grill, pulsing faintly with the warmth of the tubes inside. It wasn't just a device, it was a presence, a companion, a storyteller that lived in the corner of the living room and came alive each night. In the 1950s, radio wasn't replaced by television. It simply shifted. It became the soundtrack of the home. Music, news, sports, late-night DJs who seemed to speak only to you while the rest of the house slept. There was comfort in that. There was connection. There was a quiet magic in sitting in a dark room with nothing but the glow of a radio and the soft sound of voices drifting in from far away. Family evenings together. But if there's one memory that stands tallest in the minds of millions, it's not the shows or the music or the broadcasts. It's the evenings themselves. Evenings when the world slowed down, when families weren't scattered, when the living room wasn't a place people passed through. It was a place they lived in. There were puzzles spread across the coffee table, 1,000-piece landscapes that took days, sometimes weeks, to finish. There were board games, checkers, Monopoly, Candyland, games where arguments flared, laughter echoed, and someone always accused someone else of cheating, even though deep down everyone knew who the real culprit was. There were card games, rummy, crazy eights, bridge nights with the neighbors, laughter drifting through open windows as children fell asleep on couches to the soft shuffle of cards and grown-ups gossiping. There were nights when the TV was off, the radio was silent, and the only sound was the turning of pages as the whole house read together. One person on the floor, one in a rocking chair, one stretched across the couch with their feet dangling over the armrest. And sometimes the room was quiet enough that you could hear the ticking of a wall clock, the distant whistle of a train, the rhythmic hum of a refrigerator that never seemed to stop working. Those were the nights when life felt slow, steady, intentional. Nights when you weren't trying to keep up with life. You were simply living it. Families didn't need constant distraction. They didn't need endless content. They had each other. They had conversation. They had time, real time. There was a closeness back then, a togetherness that wasn't forced, wasn't staged, wasn't rare. It was simply the way life was, and maybe, just maybe, that's what so many people miss today. Not just the shows, not just the technology, not just the entertainment, but the way entertainment brought people together, into one room, under one roof, sharing one moment fully, completely, and without distraction. The 1950s gave us some of the greatest shows ever made, some of the most iconic broadcasts, some of the most unforgettable radio stories, but more than that, it gave us evenings that felt whole. Evenings when families weren't just living in the same house. They were living the same life. Chapter 8. Cars, Road Trips, and American Mobility. Classic cars of the era. Soft fade in. A low engine rumble, a glint of chrome catching morning sunlight, a long, slow pan over pastel paint and proud tail fins. Do you remember when cars didn't just take you places? They defined you. Before vehicles became practical machines, before everything went compact and efficient, there was a time when cars were works of art. Long, sweeping lines, shiny chrome that gleamed like polished silver, tail fins rising like wings, as if the car itself dreamed of flying. The 1950s didn't just design automobiles, they designed desire. You remember the colors? Sweet pastels that looked like they came straight from a jukebox. Mint green, baby blue, soft pink, creamy white. Colors that made highways look lighter, brighter, happier. You remember the interiors. Thick leather seats that warmed under the sun, the smell of vinyl and gasoline mingling together, the soft click of metal knobs and the clack of the steering column shifter. And oh, the way those engines sounded. Not the high-pitched whine of today's cars, but a deep, confident rumble, like a proud heartbeat of American engineering. The V8s, the smooth hum at idle, the roar when you pressed the pedal and felt the whole car lean back as if it were eager, truly eager, to run. Cars in the 1950s weren't just transportation. They were symbols of freedom, status, hope, a future that seemed wide open. Kids would point them out on the street. That's a '57 Chevy. That's a Bel Air. Look, a Cadillac. Adults admired them. Teens dreamed of them. Collectors still chased them. And if you grew up then, you probably remember sitting in the back seat as the world rushed by, the windows rolled all the way down, wind tangling your hair, sunlight flickering across your face. There was something unforgettable about that feeling. The feeling that the road wasn't just asphalt, it was possibility. The new American road trip. And with these new machines came something even bigger. A brand new American ritual, the family road trip. Back when putting luggage on the roof and kids in the back meant one thing, adventure. The suitcase rattling, the map unfolding across the front seat, Dad tapping the steering wheel, squinting at directions, pretending he wasn't lost. Mom handing snacks to the kids, trying to keep the peace as arguments broke out over who was touching whose side of the seat. And then, the moment every child loved most, we're finally on the road. America had a love affair with driving, and nowhere was it more alive than Route 66. That ribbon of highway stretching from Chicago to California, a legendary path that promised opportunity, mystery, and the thrill of the open road. Families would pass the neon signs, the quirky roadside attractions, the little towns that felt like postcards come to life. You remember the gas stations, the ones with friendly attendants who'd smile, wave, clean your windshield, check your oil, and fill your tank while you stayed comfortable in your seat. Full service wasn't just a phrase, it was an experience. Then there were the roadside diners, glowing like beacons in the night. Stainless steel siding, big glass windows. Jukeboxes filled with the latest rock and roll hits. Inside, the air smelled like hot coffee, crispy bacon, fresh pie cooling on the counter, and the sizzle of burgers on the grill. Kids swung their legs from chrome stools. Parents ordered milkshakes or fried chicken dinners. Truckers nodded in greeting. Families unwound after hours on the highway. It wasn't just food, it was comfort, a break from the road, a pause in time, and the excitement, oh, the excitement of piling into the family car. Do you remember that feeling? Everyone talking at once, doors slamming shut, the sound of luggage shifting as the car pulled out of the driveway, kids pressing their faces to the window as neighborhoods rolled away and the highway opened before them like an invitation. Blurry landscapes, sunsets melting across the sky. Radio crackling with static before finally finding a clear station playing your favorite song. Road trips in the 1950s weren't just journeys. They were memories being written in real time. Sun-soaked, wind-swept, filled with laughter, detours, and the simple joy of being away from home, yet together. Drive-ins. But if there's one memory of cars that almost everyone holds dear, it's the drive-in. Movies under the open sky. The giant white screen towering over a sea of parked cars. Speakers hanging on windows. The sound not perfect, but somehow perfect enough. Do you remember that moment when the lights finally dimmed and the screen flickered to life? The hush that fell over the lot, with only the soft murmur of engines cooling and the occasional laughter from a nearby car. Families in station wagons, kids in pajamas piled in the back with blankets and popcorn, teenagers on first dates, nervously sharing sodas and side glances, parents relaxing in lawn chairs, enjoying a movie without leaving the comfort of their car. Drive-ins weren't just theaters, they were a community gathering place, a summer tradition, a celebration of youth, romance, and American ingenuity. And for many, the memories didn't end when the movie did, because after the show, there was often a stop at the soda fountain, bright lights, chrome counters, stools that spun, teenagers laughing, couples holding hands, music drifting from a jukebox glowing in neon blues and reds, milkshakes thick enough to stand a spoon in, root beer floats crowned with bubbles, banana splits big enough to share and sometimes too big to finish. Kids ran to the pinball machines. Parents chatted with neighbors. Car hop waitresses carried trays of fries and burgers to couples who didn't want the night to end. The drive-in wasn't just a movie. It was a whole evening, a whole experience, a whole mood, the kind that settles deep into your heart and stays there forever. Because the truth is, cars in the 1950s weren't just vehicles, they were stages for memories. Road trips weren't just travel, they were adventures. And drive-ins weren't just movie theaters. They were the backdrop of growing up, falling in love, and feeling, for the first time, that the world was wide open. Chapter 9. Growing Up, Youth Culture and Teen Life. The teenager is born. Before the 1950s, there wasn't really a word for people caught between childhood and adulthood. You were a kid, and then you were grown. But in the years after the war, during the boom of suburbs and new families, something remarkable happened. The idea of the teenager was born. A brand new identity, a new stage of life, a group with its own music, its own fashion, its own rules, its own universe. And if you lived through it, you remember how it felt. A little rebellious, a little restless, a little electric, like the whole world was finally paying attention to you. Picture it, a jukebox glowing in the corner of a malt shop, chrome gleaming, colored lights dancing across the ceiling. your favorite songs waiting inside for just a nickel. And when the record dropped, when that needle touched down and the first notes of rock and roll buzzed through the speakers, you felt something shift, something new, something wild, something thrilling, something adults didn't quite understand but knew was powerful. Because this was the era when music changed everything. When a young man from Tupelo, a boy with slick hair and a soft southern drawl, stepped onto the stage and shook America awake. Elvis Presley, the first true superstar of the teenage world. His voice, warm, rebellious, irresistible. His dance moves, scandalous to parents, but electric to young hearts everywhere. Then came Chuck Berry, with guitar riffs sharp enough to cut lightning. Little Richard, with his unforgettable energy and impossible voice. Buddy Holly, with his big glasses and pure, earnest sound. Rock and roll wasn't just music. It was identity, a soundtrack to youth, a heartbeat of a generation ready to move, to dance, to feel alive. Do you remember the sound of it? The way it filled a school gym during a sock hop, the bass trembling in your chest, the rhythm impossible to resist. Girls in poodle skirts spinning in perfect circles, boys in Letterman jackets nervously pushing their hair back between dances, sneakers sliding, laughter echoing, the whole room alive with movement. Teachers stood along the wall trying to hide their smiles, pretending to supervise but secretly enjoying the glow of youthful energy. At the malt shop, teenagers crowded into booths, sharing fries, sipping thick milkshakes through striped straws, and feeding coins into jukeboxes to hear the same song again and again and again. There was nothing quite like the excitement of being young in the 1950s. Everything felt like it was just beginning. Everything felt like it mattered. And if you listen closely, if you quiet the world around you, you can still hear it. The echo of a jukebox waking up, the soft shuffle of shoes on a gym floor, the first guitar chord of a rock and roll classic that once made you feel invincible. First crushes and innocent romance. Being a teenager wasn't just about the music, it was about the feelings. Those fluttering, confusing, wonderful feelings that arrived almost suddenly, as if overnight. Your first crush, do you remember it? The way your heart raced when you saw them walking down the hallway, books held tight against their chest, hair perfectly combed, a shy smile that made your stomach flip. Back then, romance was sweeter, softer, gentler. Notes passed discreetly during class, folded into tiny squares with little doodles in the margins. Do you like me? Check yes or no. Simple words that felt like the most important message in the world. Rehearsing what you would say, practicing in front of a mirror, changing your outfit 3 times before the school dance. And oh, the school dance. The gym decorated with crepe paper streamers, a disco ball turning slowly overhead, teachers awkwardly setting up a record player, the lights dimming just enough to make everything feel magical. Fast songs came first, the ones where everyone could jump around and pretend they weren't nervous. But everyone waited for the moment when the opening notes of a slow song played. That was the moment, the real test, the real thrill, a deep breath, a steadying of courage. Would you like to dance? Sometimes the answer was yes. Sometimes it was no. But both answers shaped your memory of youth, and if the answer was yes, the world shifted. Your hands awkwardly finding the right place to rest, their head leaning gently toward your shoulder, your heart thumping so loudly You were sure they could hear it. The slow sway, the warmth, the closeness, the smell of their cologne or their perfume, and the feeling, that unforgettable feeling, that you were sharing a moment that would stay with you forever. Do you remember your first slow dance? The butterflies, the trembling hands, the miracle of someone saying yes when you were certain they'd say no? Teenage romance in the 1950s wasn't about rushing. It wasn't about pressure. It wasn't about perfection. It was about innocence. Shyness, simple gestures with enormous meaning, walking someone home after school, talking on a rotary phone until your parents shouted, "Time to hang up now," saving ticket stubs from movies you watched together, sharing a milkshake with 2 straws, laughing over spilled soda or melted ice cream. You were discovering yourself while discovering someone else. And somewhere between the jukebox songs, the school dances, the handwritten notes, and the first nervous kisses, you learned what it meant to feel something deeper, something warm and hopeful and unforgettable. Because growing up in the 1950s wasn't just about freedom or rebellion. It was about tenderness, about moments that shaped your heart, about a kind of young love that still makes your chest tighten when you think about it today. Those memories don't fade. They soften like old photographs, but they remain as powerful as ever. A reminder of a time when life felt simple, when emotions felt enormous, and when being young meant every moment was a new experience, sparkling with possibility. Chapter 10. Work Life and Adult Responsibilities. 1950s. Careers. Soft piano underscores the scene. Visuals fade in gently. Men stepping out of modest homes in neatly pressed suits, lunch pails swinging, the morning sun glinting off freshly washed cars. For many families in the 1950s, life followed a rhythm. Predictable, steady, almost musical in its quiet consistency. And if you were an adult in those years, you probably remember that rhythm well. The workday began early, earlier than it does for many today. The alarm clock ringing softly on a nightstand, the smell of coffee drifting from the kitchen, a quick glance out the window at a neighborhood where every house was waking up at nearly the same moment. Men pulled on their shirts, buttoned them up with a sense of purpose, looped ties around their collars, and reached for a hat, because in the 1950s, a man rarely left the house without one. Do you remember that? The feel of a fedora settling gently on your head, the slight tilt you adjusted in the mirror before stepping out. Some headed to factories, where the air buzzed with machinery and the smell of metal and oil lingered in the air. Factories were alive, full of clanging metal, spinning belts, workers moving in harmony like parts of a bigger machine. Others worked in offices, neatly arranged desks, typewriters clacking in a rhythmic chorus, telephones ringing with that crisp metallic sound only rotary phones could make. And some ran or worked in small shops, hardware stores, groceries, barbershops, places where everyone knew one another, places where people didn't just shop. They stopped to talk, to catch up, to share a moment of community. Women, too, worked, though their roles often looked different. Many were homemakers, managing the household with a discipline and dedication that often goes unspoken. Others worked in clerical positions, secretaries, telephone operators, bookkeepers, receptionists. Do you remember the sound of those early manual typewriters? The ringing bell at the end of a line? The way the keys struck the paper with a firm, satisfying snap? Work in the 1950s wasn't glamorous. It wasn't loud or boastful. It was steady, routine, dependable, and there was a pride in that. A pride in knowing your job mattered, your effort was seen, your contribution built the world your family lived in. There were no laptops on desks, no buzzing smartphones, no constant email notifications, just honest labor, hands that worked, minds that focused, and a belief, quiet but powerful, that each day you showed up made life a little better for the people waiting at home. Factories hummed, offices clicked and clattered, shops opened their doors with a bell that jingled whenever a customer entered. And through it all, the 1950s carried a work ethic that shaped a generation that believed in putting one foot in front of the other, day after day, always moving forward. Maybe you remember that feeling, walking into your workplace each morning with your lunch wrapped in wax paper or in a metal lunchbox with a familiar scuff on one corner. Maybe you still remember the familiar faces you saw every day, men in rolled-up sleeves, women with notepads tucked under their arms, co-workers who felt like neighbors even if you barely knew where they lived. Work wasn't just work. It was community. It was stability. It was part of the story of who you were becoming. And when the clock finally hit quitting time, another rhythm began. Coming home after a long day, there was nothing quite like the feeling of coming home after a long day in the 1950s. Maybe you still remember it. The way the late afternoon light settled across the street, turning the sidewalks gold. The sound of children playing in the yard, still laughing, still full of energy, even as dinner time approached. You'd step through the front door and place your shoes by the entrance. Always the same spot, always worn smooth from habit. The house greeted you with warmth and familiarity. A living room softly lit by a table lamp, the kind with a warm yellow glow that made the whole space feel safe. A newspaper folded neatly on the armchair, your favorite slippers waiting nearby, and the smell, that unforgettable smell, of dinner drifting from the kitchen. Maybe it was pot roast, or meatloaf, or chicken and dumplings, or a casserole bubbling quietly in the oven. Whatever it was, it wrapped around you like a welcome home hug. Do you remember that moment? When you hung your hat on the rack, loosened your tie, and exhaled the entire day in a single breath? Life felt slower then, a little softer, a little kinder. Children rushed in, excited to show something they drew, or a marble they won at recess, or a school paper they were proud of. Your spouse, often having spent the entire day keeping the home running, offered a smile, a gentle greeting, a warmth that grounded you instantly. The family room filled with the sound of radio music or early television shows, a low murmur of voices, the subtle clink of silverware being set on the table. There were no endless notifications, no frantic emails, no digital noise shouting for attention, just home. Quiet, steady, reliable home. And inside that home was a peaceful rhythm that carried you from the front door to the dinner table to the evening spent together. Maybe after dinner, you settled into an armchair, reading the paper while a record played softly in the background. Maybe someone stitched or knitted nearby. Maybe the kids worked on homework or played with toy trains spread across the carpet. The house filled with soft sounds, the rustle of newspaper pages, the ticking of a clock on the wall, the hum of a refrigerator, the distant laughter from a child's bedroom. And underneath all of it, a simple truth. Home was the place where the world slowed down, where the stress of the day faded, where you could breathe again, where you belonged. In the 1950s, adult responsibilities weren't easy. They required effort and discipline and sacrifice. But each evening, walking through that familiar doorway, you felt something precious. The comfort of knowing you were building a life, a family, a future, and maybe, if you close your eyes right now, you can still hear the soft lamplight, still feel the carpet under your feet, still sense the safety of that moment when you stepped into your home and everything felt calm. Life was slower then, and somehow in its slowness, it felt full, deep, meaningful, a rhythm of responsibility, love, and quiet gratitude that shaped a generation. Chapter 11. Community, Church and Traditions. Sundays in America. Maybe you remember it too. That strange, almost sacred stillness that settled over a Sunday morning in 1950s America. The world didn't rush. It didn't demand. It didn't push or pull or tug at your attention the way today's world does. It simply slowed. A calm that began even before you opened your eyes, carried on the faint sound of church bells drifting through an open bedroom window, mixed with the soft rustle of trees outside. For so many families, Sunday wasn't just a day. It was the day. A pause in the rhythm of life, a reset button, a collective deep breath across every neighborhood, town, and quiet little street. You can probably still picture the scene. Mothers preparing children's clothes the night before, little dresses carefully ironed, small jackets brushed clean, tiny shoes polished until they shined like new pennies. Fathers unfolding their best suits, usually the same one they wore every Sunday, still holding the faint smell of the last service they attended. And then morning came, windows filled with golden light. Breakfasts made just a little heartier than usual. Scrambled eggs, warm biscuits, maybe bacon if you were lucky. The kitchen felt different on Sundays, not rushed, not loud, almost ceremonial, because everyone knew today we're all going together. Families stepping out the door, children fidgeting, fathers locking the house behind them, mothers gently smoothing a child's hair one last time. And those slow walks or short drives to church, that's where some of the strongest memories live. Maybe you remember how quiet the streets were. No blaring horns, hardly any traffic, just a few cars rolling at the same steady pace toward the same familiar place. And then the church came into view. White steeple, brick steps, tall windows, a gathering of neighbors greeting each other with the warmth of people who truly knew one another. Somewhere inside, an organ was already playing. That deep, comforting hum drifting onto the street long before you stepped through the doors. And once you did step inside, the world changed. Voices hushed themselves without anyone asking. The air felt still, reverent, full. Sunlight streamed through stained glass, painting rows of pews in soft colored light. Maybe you remember the smell. Polished wood, old hymnals, a hint of perfume or aftershave from the people sitting nearby. You may have even had a favorite pew. Most families did. Children whispering or swinging their legs, adults listening attentively, the choir lifting its voice in a way that seemed to reach inside your chest and stir something warm and steady. For many, Sunday wasn't just religious, it was communal, a moment when everyone in town gathered under one roof and remembered they were part of something bigger than themselves. And when the service ended, that's when another tradition began. big Sunday lunches. As soon as the final hymn faded and the handshakes and greetings were exchanged, families returned home to one of the most cherished rituals of the entire week: Sunday dinner. Maybe your house smelled like pot roast, simmering since early morning, or fried chicken cooling on the counter, or mashed potatoes whipped with a skill only your mother or grandmother possessed. Tables were set with intention, the good plates, the real napkins, maybe even a tablecloth that only came out on special occasions. And everyone sat together, not scattered, not distracted, not half present the way people often are today. The whole family, across generations sometimes, gathered around one table to talk, laugh, and simply enjoy being together. You might remember stories told again and again, and yet they never seemed to get old. Or the laughter of cousins playing nearby, or an uncle telling a joke before dessert, or your father leaning back in his chair, satisfied in a way only a Sunday could make him. And after lunch, the world slowed even more. Some families took quiet walks. Some lounged on front porches, rocking gently in wooden chairs. Some napped with a newspaper resting on their chest. Even the streets felt different, quieter, calmer, softer. Sunday afternoons were a kind of gentle silence that's rare today, yet unforgettable once you've lived it. Civic life, but the heartbeat of 1950s America, wasn't only found in churches or family homes, it lived in the communities, those tightly woven networks of people who believed in showing up, pitching in, and being there for one another. It's almost hard to describe just how active civic life used to be, because it wasn't just a nice to have. It was the glue that held towns and neighborhoods together. Maybe you remember PK meetings, parents gathering in school gyms or classrooms, folding chairs arranged in long rows, the smell of chalk, pencils, and floor polish lingering in the air, mothers organizing bake sales, fathers volunteering for playground repairs, teachers meeting with families who they often knew by name, not just as students, but as children with stories, quirks, and dreams. The PTA wasn't just an organization, it was a cornerstone of community. Rotary clubs, Lions clubs, and Kiwanis men in neatly pressed shirts, meeting early in the morning or after work. Coffee poured into thick ceramic mugs, the hum of conversation about local road repairs, charity events, scholarships, or helping a neighbor who'd fallen on hard times. These clubs shaped entire towns. Their service projects built parks, fixed playgrounds, supported local businesses, and raised money for families in need. And it was all done quietly and without expectation, without spotlight, just people helping people. Church groups and women's circles. Maybe you remember your mother or grandmother heading to a midweek meeting with a casserole, a sewing kit, or a stack of recipe cards. These groups were powerful in ways history books sometimes forget to mention. They organized charity drives. They cooked meals for grieving families. They visited the sick. They prepared holiday events. They kept traditions alive. And through it all, they formed friendships that lasted decades. Bake sales, parades, and town celebrations. If you grew up in the 1950s, you probably remember the smell of homemade pies lined up on long folding tables, or brownies wrapped in wax paper, or the sound of children running between booths at a church fair. You might remember parades, small but full of pride, local marching bands, Shriners in parade cars, veterans carrying flags, children waving from decorated floats pulled by simple pickup trucks. Entire towns turned up for these events, not because they were required, not because there was nothing else to do, but because belonging mattered, because showing up for your community was part of life, part of identity, part of what made the world feel safe, warm, and connected. Emotional peak, the closeness of small towns. There's a moment many people from that era remember with a kind of bittersweet ache. It's the memory of knowing that in your town, you were never alone. If a storm knocked a tree onto your house, neighbors showed up with saws. If someone fell ill, meals appeared at their door. If your family hit hard times, the whole community quietly stepped in to help. People didn't need to be asked. They didn't need an invitation. They didn't need a formal request. It was simply understood. We take care of each other here. And maybe that's what people miss most about the 1950s. Not the fashions, not the cars, not the music, though those were wonderful in their own way. What they miss is the knowing your neighbors, knowing your community, knowing that if you disappeared for a day, someone would notice and knock on your door to check in. That sense of belonging, that deep-rooted connection, is something few generations will ever experience again in the same way. But you did, and that memory still lives within you, a warm ember, a gentle reminder of a time when America felt smaller, yet somehow fuller. Chapter 12, Holidays and Family Celebrations. Christmas in the 1950s. If you close your eyes, you can almost feel it again. That unmistakable magic that arrived every December in the 1950s. A magic so thick you could breathe it in, like the scent of pine needles mixing with cold winter air as you stepped outside on a frosty morning. Christmas wasn't a season back then. It was an experience, a transformation that swept into every home, every neighborhood, every busy downtown street, and for a few precious weeks made the whole world sparkle a little brighter. Maybe you remember how it started? The first box of decorations being pulled down from the attic, the sound of tape being peeled from old cardboard, or your parents unwrapping delicate ornaments, each one carrying a story older than you were. And then, the tree. Back then, it wasn't bought online or delivered in a van. It was chosen, carefully, reverently. Families bundled up, drove out to a local lot, or walked through rows of trees leaning one way or another in the chilly air. Children running ahead, fathers checking the straightness of the trunk, mothers imagining how it would look glowing in the living room. And once it was brought home, that's when the magic truly began. The living room transformed into a workshop of joy. Pine needles scattered on the carpet. Someone untangling a string of lights, usually unsuccessfully. Children begging to hang ornaments at their height, creating a cluster of color near the bottom of the tree, but perhaps the most iconic sight of all, silver tinsel. You might remember how it shimmered, catching every flicker of the tree lights. Some families hung it one strand at a time, slow and deliberate. Others tossed it by the handful, creating sparkling waterfalls of silver from every branch. And then came the lights. Not the LED strings we have today, but bubble lights. Tiny glass tubes filled with colorful liquid, glowing softly as they bubbled like miniature lava lamps. There was something enchanting about them, something alive. Children would sit cross-legged on the floor just to watch them, mesmerized by the gentle rise and fall of the bubbles. And beneath the tree, so many children remember the same magical sight. A train set circling the base, wheels gently clicking on the track, engine puffing imaginary smoke. it was more than a toy. It was a symbol, a ritual, something fathers and sons or daughters proudly built together every December. You might remember the hum the train made as it moved, or the feeling of kneeling on the carpet and watching it disappear behind the tree, only to re-emerge on the other side like a familiar friend. The whole house participated in Christmas, mantels lined with cards from neighbors, stockings hung, sometimes handmade, sometimes old, always filled with love. A wreath on the front door, possibly decorated with whatever nature offered, pine cones, sprays of holly, or ribbons saved from years past. And oh, the music, not streaming playlists or algorithm-sorted collections, but warm, crackling vinyl records spinning on turntables, Bing Crosby, Nat King Cole, Perry Como, voices that felt like comfort, familiarity, and home. Their songs didn't just play in the background. They filled rooms, shaped memories, and carried families through the season. On Christmas Eve, excitement ran high. Children lying in bed, eyes wide open, listening for sleigh bells they were certain they heard in the distance. Parents whispering in the hallway, carefully setting out presents, making sure everything would be perfect by morning. And Christmas morning, oh, how vivid it remains in the hearts of those who lived it. Footsteps racing downstairs, the glow of the tree still on from the night before, the smell of breakfast cooking in the kitchen, cinnamon rolls, bacon, hot cocoa, presents wrapped in simple paper, bows slightly crushed, gifts chosen with care, not volume, children laughing, parents smiling, and for one brief, perfect moment, the world felt wrapped in peace. Christmas in the 1950s was more than a holiday. It was a season of togetherness when families, no matter how modest their means, found ways to make life feel extraordinary. And even now, decades later, that magic hasn't faded. It lives in the memories, in the quiet ache of nostalgia, in the belief that life once felt simpler, warmer, and more deeply connected. Birthdays, 4th of July, and Thanksgiving. Of course, Christmas wasn't the only celebration that defined the 1950s. Throughout the year, families gathered for moments big and small, each one marked not by extravagance, but by presence, tradition, and a kind of joy that come from simply being together. Let's take a walk through them. Birthdays. Birthdays in the 1950s had a certain innocence, a sweetness that today's flashing screens and elaborate parties sometimes overshadow. Maybe you remember your own childhood birthdays. A homemade cake, usually chocolate or vanilla, frosted by hand, with slightly uneven swirls that made it more special, not less. Candles stuck into the top, not coordinated, not themed, just candles, a small gathering of friends from the neighborhood. Simple party games like pin the tail on the donkey or musical chairs, paper hats, laughter, maybe a new shirt or a toy car or a doll. Nothing extravagant, just love, just family, just childhood at its purest. 4th of July. Then there was the 4th of July, a day that felt like summer itself. You can probably still smell it, that warm scent of grilled hamburgers drifting across open lawns, fresh-cut grass tickling your ankles, lemonade so cold it frosted the outside of the glass jar, children running barefoot, waving sparklers that drew glowing trails through the warm night air, families gathered on blankets at the local park, waiting for the fireworks to begin. Some lying back on the grass, others leaning into each other, all staring up at the sky with wide, waiting eyes. And when the fireworks started, boom, crackle, glow. The sky exploded into reds, blues, greens, and golds. The crowd oohed and awed in unison, that instinctive sound of shared wonder. It wasn't just fireworks, it was community. It was pride. It was a reminder that no matter how different people were during the week, on nights like this, everyone looked up at the same sky. Thanksgiving, and then the warmest holiday of all, Thanksgiving. If you grew up in the 1950s, you probably remember the entire house turning into a symphony of smells early in the morning. Roasted turkey filling every room, stuffing seasoned just right, mashed potatoes being whipped in a big ceramic bowl, pumpkin pie cooling by a window, mothers wearing aprons dusted with flour, grandmothers checking the oven armed with decades of culinary wisdom, children sneaking olives or pickles from the table when they thought no one was looking. And when the meal was finally ready, the family gathered, every chair filled, every hand holding a fork, every heart full. Before eating, there was often a moment of quiet gratitude, not scripted, not forced, just real. Thanksgiving wasn't about shopping or rushing. It was about presence, about sitting together at one table and remembering all the reasons there were to be thankful. The laughter, the warmth, the stories told across generations, the sense that no matter what the world looked like outside, in that home, in that moment, everything was okay. Holidays and celebrations in the 1950s weren't about perfection. They were about connection, about people, about love expressed through simple traditions that stood the test of time. Maybe that's why these memories feel so strong, so vivid, so lasting. Because they weren't just events. They were anchors, moments that shaped childhoods, strengthened families, and created stories still told today. And maybe, as you listen, you can feel them again. That glow, that laughter, that warmth. The holidays of your youth, alive, timeless, and waiting to be remembered. Chapter 13, The Changing World. Near the end of the 50s, subtle shifts. As the decade neared its close, something subtle began to shift in America. It wasn't loud, it wasn't sudden, it didn't arrive with fanfare or warning. But if you lived through it, you probably felt it. A quiet hum in the background, a gentle nudge, a sense that the world you knew was beginning to stretch, expand, and accelerate. The 1950s had been a time of comfort, routine, and familiar rhythms. But near the end of the decade, life started whispering a new tempo. You may remember it. The roads were getting busier, neighborhoods were expanding farther and farther into the suburbs. Homes were being built faster than ever, block after block of fresh paint, new fences, and families arriving with boxes full of hope. And technology, slowly but unmistakably, began to shape everyday life in ways people hadn't seen before. Television, the new American hearth. Just a few years earlier, televisions had been a novelty, something only a handful of homes could brag about. But by the late 50s, the glow of a TV set became the new evening fireplace. Maybe you remember gathering around it at dusk, the warm hum as the tubes heated up, the faint static that danced across the screen before the picture settled. Families planned their nights around TV shows. Neighbors talked about episodes the next morning. Children remembered the characters like friends. And for the first time in history, a nation began sharing the same stories at the same time. Television changed how people learned, laughed, and connected. It wasn't just entertainment, it was culture taking its first steps into the living room. And with TV came something new. Advertising that spoke directly to families. Commercials promising the future. Better appliances, faster cars. New conveniences that felt almost futuristic. The pace of life was inching forward, even if most families didn't fully realize it. Cars. Faster, flashier, bolder. If you lived through the late 50s, you probably remember how cars transformed. Earlier in the decade, automobiles were simple, solid, dependable, modest. But suddenly, engines got stronger. Tail fins got higher. Chrome gleamed brighter. Colors became bold, bright reds, sky blues, creamy pastels. Cars weren't just transportation anymore. They became symbols. Symbols of youth. Symbols of status. Symbols of the future. Teenagers felt it too. You might remember watching older boys rev their engines in the driveway or seeing packs of cars cruising down the main streets on Friday nights, windows rolled down, music drifting into the summer air. America was beginning to move faster, not just physically, but culturally. And those roads, they stretched farther than they ever had. New highways carved through fields and towns. Drive-ins popped up along the edges of cities. Long-distance travel became easier, and families started exploring farther than their local county lines. Something was happening, something big, but it was happening quietly, in the small ways people lived and moved. Neighborhoods expand and quietly shift. Near the end of the 1950s, neighborhoods evolved in subtle ways. You might remember seeing new families arrive, car doors opening, little kids jumping out and racing around the yard, new toys appearing on front lawns, new voices joining the chorus of weekday afternoons. Suburban streets grew longer, cul-de-sacs appeared, corner lots filled in, sidewalks stretched out like promises. But with growth came change. More cars meant fewer people walking door to door. New construction meant old open fields disappeared. Families had more space, which sometimes meant they spent a little more time indoors. Life wasn't losing its warmth, but it was gently shifting its shape. It's funny how change feels so soft when you're living inside it. How you can miss the signs while they're happening. But years later, you look back and realize that those small ripples were the beginning of a whole new tide. New technology, new possibilities. Inventions appeared in kitchens, in living rooms, in garages. Innovations meant to save time, make life easier, or add a spark of excitement to everyday routines. Washing machines became more reliable. Refrigerators grew bigger and more modern. Record players improved in sound quality. Baby products became more standardized. Even toys began incorporating plastic, opening the door to brighter shapes and bolder designs. These weren't dramatic changes, not at first glance, but they were stepping stones to a world that would soon accelerate, a world where convenience would become expected, where technology would grow year after year and faster than anyone in the 50s could have fully imagined. But in that moment, as the decade closed, it still felt gentle, exciting, yes, but not overwhelming. There was a sense of promise in the air, a sense that the world was opening up, that life somehow was on the cusp of something bigger. Reflection on the innocence of the era. Looking back now, you can probably feel it, that the late 50s were the last chapter of something tender, something uniquely innocent, something America would never quite have again. The world was about to speed up, but in those final years of the decade, life still held on to its slower rhythm. Children still played outside until the streetlights came on. Neighbors still waved from their front porches. Families still gathered around dinner tables every night. Phones still hung on walls. Mail still arrived by hand. Television shut off with a soft glow and a hum. There was time. There was space. There was connection. And even as subtle signs of change slipped into everyday life, the innocence of the era still wrapped around families like a warm blanket. It was the last decade where childhood unfolded in wide-open neighborhoods with simple toys, simple pleasures, and simple joys. The last decade where evenings were quiet, radio songs drifted softly through the house, and families shared routines untouched by modern distractions. And maybe that's why the memories feel so powerful, so vivid, so precious, because they belong to a moment in history where life was gentle, predictable, and filled with small, meaningful rituals. We didn't know how fast the world would change. Maybe you've said that to yourself before, or heard someone older say it. But it's true. No one knew. No one knew that the 1960s would bring waves of transformation. That technology would evolve faster than anyone could dream. That culture would shift, society would reshape, and the world would become a place almost unrecognizable from the quiet, warm streets of the 1950s. But that is exactly what makes your memories so important. They are not just moments from a childhood. They are snapshots of a world that existed for only a brief window of time. A world built on community, family, routine, respect, slowness, and an unspoken trust in tomorrow. A world where small things mattered more than big ones, where joy came from presence, not possessions. A world that feels like home not because of the things it had, but because of the way it made you feel. Safe, seen, rooted, connected, alive. And as you look back now, you can almost feel it again. The smell of Sunday dinners, the warm hum of the family TV, the laughter of neighborhood kids echoing down wide open streets, the glow of a porch light waiting for someone to return home, the softness of summer nights, the peacefulness of winter mornings, the comfort of knowing life moved at a pace your heart could follow. The innocence of the 1950s wasn't about perfection. It was about simplicity, about being present, about having enough, and feeling that enough was all you needed. The world would soon change, faster, louder, brighter, but you lived through a time, a golden, gentle time, when life unfolded slowly and every moment had room to breathe. And that time, that feeling lives inside you still. Chapter 14. What growing up in the 50s really meant. Identity and values. Growing up in the 1950s wasn't just about tail fins, neighborhood games, or the glow of tube-powered televisions. Beneath all the imagery, beneath the style, the chrome, the iconic culture, there was something deeper, something quieter, something many people today say we've lost. It was a way of becoming a person. It was a decade that shaped identity through small daily lessons. Lessons learned not from lectures or social media feeds, but from community, from family, from the rhythm of ordinary life. Let's walk through the values that defined that world and shaped an entire generation. Respect, a cornerstone of the era. 1950s respect wasn't loud. It wasn't forced. It wasn't written into motivational posters. It was simply expected. Children said "sir" and "ma'am," not because they feared punishment, but because that was how you talked to adults. Doors were held open, hats were tipped, neighbors greeted each other whether they were close friends or not. And perhaps most importantly, respect wasn't selective. You showed it to teachers, to your elders, to bus drivers, to the man sweeping the shop floor. It was woven into the smallest interactions. Even disagreements felt different. Arguments ended with a handshake. A forgotten quarrel didn't spark a decade-long feud. People valued dignity, composure, a sense of carrying yourself with pride. And this mattered because when you live in communities where everyone knows each other, where your teacher goes to the same diner you do, where your neighbor might be your father's co-worker, respect becomes a kind of glue, a stabilizer, a shared understanding that everyone is trying their best. Many people who grew up in the 50s say, "We didn't have much, but we respected each other, and maybe that made all the difference." Kindness. The everyday kind. There was a quiet kindness threaded through everyday life in the 1950s. Not charity events or big gestures, but small, continuous acts. A neighbor who shoveled your sidewalk after a snowfall without asking. A mom who made an extra sandwich for the boy next door because she knew there wasn't much food at home. Kids who brought homemade cookies to new families moving in. Kindness was not performative. There was no camera, no post, no like button. Just people showing up for each other. If your car broke down, a stranger would pull over immediately. If someone lost a job, the community knew within days. And a casserole or a bag of groceries would quietly find its way to their doorstep. Even the way people spoke carried that softness. Compliments were sincere. Advice was gentle. Disagreements didn't tear communities apart. And the beauty of it, that kindness wasn't taught through lectures. You learned it by watching the adults around you. The 50s didn't need to teach kindness as a school subject. You absorbed it by living in a world where kindness was normal. Family unity, the center of everything. For most families, everything started and ended at home. The kitchen table was the heart of America. It's where homework was finished, where bills were paid, where birthday cakes were sliced, and where mothers and fathers talked late into the evening after the children went to bed. Dinner wasn't a suggestion. It was a nightly ritual. No phones, no television blaring in the background, just conversation. Sometimes lively, sometimes quiet, but always together. Sundays were for visiting grandparents, picnics at the park, or piling the kids into the car for a scenic drive with no destination in mind. Family wasn't something you balanced with a busy schedule. It was the schedule. And this didn't mean families were perfect, far from it. But the togetherness mattered. Those moments built a sense of security, belonging, and grounding that shaped childhood in the 1950s. Even decades later, many people say, "I didn't realize how good it was," until those days were gone. Simplicity, a life lived slow enough to remember. The 1950s moved differently, not slower in a stuck-in-the-past way, but slow in a human way. There weren't constant notifications. You couldn't be reached 24/7. Most errands required walking or talking to another person. There wasn't an endless stream of entertainment. You read, you played cards, you sat on the porch and listened to crickets. You fixed things instead of replacing them. Nostalgia often comes from simplicity, because simple moments stay with us. The sound of the screen door creaking, a bicycle's bell, the evening breeze carrying the smell of someone grilling 2 blocks away. These sensory memories endure for decades. Life wasn't perfect, but it was tangible, memorable, grounded, and it gave people time. time to think, time to breathe, time to interact face to face, time to really feel their lives as they lived them. Emotional elevation moment. After 14 chapters of journeying through the 1950s, after revisiting neighborhoods, families, road trips, Christmas mornings, first loves, and long summer days, we arrive here to the heart of it all. Let's slow everything down for one final moment. Close your eyes if you want, and imagine yourself standing on a quiet 1950s street again. The sun is setting, that soft amber glow washing across the houses. A child rides by on a bicycle, the spokes clicking. Somewhere far off, you hear the faint echo of a radio, a ball game maybe, or a familiar melody drifting through open windows. A mother is watering her flowers. A father is coming home from work, lunch pail in hand. You smell fresh-cut grass, and you feel safe. You feel seen. You feel like you belong. Now ask yourself, why do so many people cling to these memories? Why do they return to them again and again, even 60, 70 years later? Maybe it's not the cars, though they were beautiful. Maybe it's not the diners, though they had charm. Maybe it's not even the music, though it changed the world. Maybe, just maybe, we hold on to these memories so tightly because they remind us of who we used to be, of a time when life felt understandable, when neighbors felt like family, when the world felt open, hopeful, and full of possibility, when innocence wasn't something rare. It was just part of growing up. These memories matter because they carry the values that shaped a generation: respect, kindness, unity, simplicity. They are the foundation beneath the nostalgia. They are the reason the era still glows in the hearts of millions. And perhaps the most powerful truth of all is this: nostalgia isn't longing for the past. It's longing for the parts of ourselves we sometimes forget. And sometimes, to remember who we are, we revisit where we came from. Chapter 15. Conclusion. Return to the opening scene. And now, we return to where we began. Morning light spills gently across a familiar kitchen table, that quiet golden glow, the same glow that touched millions of American homes in the 1950s, drifts in through thin curtains swaying softly with the breeze. There's a cup of coffee steaming again, just like at the beginning. That simple ritual, that quiet moment before the day begins. There's no rush, no frantic schedule, no endless digital noise, just warmth, just sunlight, just a feeling that life is something precious. You can almost hear the radio humming again, that soft, warm crackle just before the announcer's voice comes through. A familiar melody drifts into the room. Something gentle, something steady, something that feels like the heartbeat of a world long gone. The calendar might say we're in the present, but for just a moment, for just these few minutes, time slows, time softens, time becomes the friend it used to be. We've come full circle, from this warm kitchen table to the quiet neighborhoods, to evening drives down Main Street, to church bells ringing, to Saturday morning cartoons, to first dances, to Christmas mornings, to family dinners, to long summer nights. And now, we're back here again. The same table, the same soft light, the same warm nostalgia. And this time, something's different, because now you're not just remembering the 1950s, you've lived them again. Gratitude and reflection. What a journey you've taken. Think about what we walked through together. You felt the morning routines, the smell of bacon and eggs on a cast iron skillet, the clatter of cereal bowls on the table. You stepped into the street and felt the warmth of sidewalks beneath your shoes, heard the laughter of children racing on bicycles, watched neighbors chatting across fences. You experienced after-school adventures, sock hops, jukeboxes, roller rinks, the magic of rock and roll shaking the world for the very first time. You rode in the back seat on long summer road trips, windows open, wind whipping through your hair, the world stretching endlessly ahead. You sat with families gathered around black and white TVs, felt the anticipation of each new episode, shared the laughter and the awe. You stood on church pews, felt the warmth of Sunday mornings, heard the echo of choir harmonies, saw neighbors linking arms at potlucks and parades. You sat at Thanksgiving tables, watched tinsel shimmer on Christmas trees, opened presents under colorful bubble lights. You lived through the slight shifts, technology creeping in, cars getting sleeker, neighborhoods growing, the world gently changing, and through every chapter, every memory, every moment, one truth stayed constant. The beauty of the 1950s is not just in what happened, but in how it made you feel. Because the 1950s didn't just give you memories, they gave you values, identity, love, hope, community, a sense of belonging. They gave you a childhood, or parents who raised you with those values, or grandparents who shared those stories, or a world you've only ever admired from photographs and old films. And now, sitting again at this kitchen table in the warm morning light, you may feel something deep inside, a softness, a tenderness, a grateful ache, not a sad ache, but the kind that reminds you that you lived through something beautiful or were shaped by someone who did. You carry these memories. You carry these stories. You carry these values, kindness, respect, unity, simplicity, even now, even decades later. And maybe that's the greatest gift the 1950s ever gave us, the reminder that life's most important moments are rarely loud. They're quiet, simple, human. A cup of coffee, neighbors helping neighbors, families gathering, children laughing, communities standing strong. And you, sitting here once more, have just revisited all of it. The world may move faster now, but memories like these, they never age. Soft, emotional, call to action. Before we close this journey, before we let the sunlight fade and the radio hum fall silent, I want to talk directly to you. Because this channel, this community, these stories, they're built on something very real. Your memories, your voice, your life. So I want to ask you something, and it comes from the heart. Share your favorite 1950s memory in the comments. Maybe it's the smell of your mother's cooking. Maybe it's the first time you heard Elvis. Maybe it's your grandparents' stories of summer nights or soda fountains or church picnics or long car rides with no destination at all. Maybe it's a tiny moment, a small detail only you remember. Those are the ones that matter most, because when you share your memory, you're not just posting a comment, you're keeping this golden hour alive. Every story you share helps someone else remember theirs. Every little detail brings the decade back to life. Every memory you write becomes part of a larger tapestry, the collective heartbeat of a generation. So leave yours below, whether it's a paragraph or a single sentence, whether you lived it or learned it from someone you loved, or simply admire the era from far away. Your story matters here, and if you haven't subscribed yet, consider joining us, not because of numbers, not because of metrics, but because this is a community that remembers together, a place where memories are honored, stories are shared, and the past is kept alive, one warm, nostalgic moment at a time. Thank you for taking this journey. Thank you for feeling these moments. Thank you for remembering. This has been more than a video. It's been a reunion with the past, with your memories, with who you once were, and maybe still are. Until next time, keep the golden hour alive and keep the memories close.